The guest is Mr. Demeke and Ms. Hilt, and one from Fisk University, Mr. Demeke, and Ms. Hilt from Tennessee State University. And of course, Ms. Hilt, I think we promised before we had our final commercial break that we'd give you an opportunity to speak to the issue of the Horn and Kenya, because Kenya, I think, has been in the news quite recently, and I understand that you are a specialist still and having been to Kenya and dealt with Kenya. So what's going on in Kenya from your perspective now?
Well, a lot of people right now are collapsing various issues going on in Kenya. I think that the one that is the foremost issue and the one that needs to be dealt with the most immediately, and also the one that the international community can help and assist with the most, is the current humanitarian crisis, which extends beyond Kenya, because an unstable Kenya will be unable to provide the services that it has previously been providing to various countries. So currently, in addition to the deaths, there are roughly 250,000 Kenyans who are currently displaced. But more significantly, Kenya has been providing absolutely fundamental resources, not only to populations of people in various countries surrounding Kenya, but also to aid workers and people leading humanitarian efforts in those places. For example, I was doing some research in southern Sudan and had to be medically evacuated to Kenya. So an unstable Kenya can really be problematic for surrounding countries. Now, politically, I think that we should focus more on what is actually happening than what Kenya represents. I think that when you get more concerned with the president and the representation, you can lose sight of the immediate situation. So they have had a thwarted election, and now President Kibaki is conducting himself as though the elections were valid and as though they have not been contested, and that's problematic. But I think that if we leave it there politically, we can assist and help Kenya deal with their political situation. I think when we begin to make projections about the destiny of an entire region, then we get more involved with we don't focus on the solutions, and we're not as effective. So
would it be fair to say that our position has to be that what has happened in Kenya has happened, and that while we might deplore the whole thwarted government idea and et cetera, that we still have to work with whoever is there the best that we can work with them in order to protect and save some of the people that would otherwise would not be saved if we continue to deal with the government as such?
Well, I think that immediately our position should certainly deal effectively and quickly with the humanitarian crisis. And secondly, I think that we should continue to make decisions about a United States position in regards to Kenya as things unfold there. Ultimately, Kenyans will have to deal with their political issues as a sovereign nation. However, pressure can be put on President Kibaki to handle a situation differently. Trade agreements can be affected. There are a variety of ways to influence a government that is not making decisions in the best interest of its population. And there are also a variety of ways to fairly and nonpartisanly support individuals or citizens of a nation who are being treated unfairly. But if you focus on human rights and humanitarian issues, I think that for right now, that should be the impetus.
You know, Mr. Demeke, we've talked about Ethiopia and we've talked about Kenya, but now the Sudan and Rwanda and several other nations in that area, it seems to me that there ought to be some kind of organization created by maybe freedom fighters in these particular areas to bring, because all of these countries face essentially the same problem, you see, and there ought to be some kind of organization developed that would bring all of these countries together. Is there any thought of trying to create that kind of organization among these countries?
Well, there is none to speak of. as we say, those dictators will not bring these things together to make it a safe haven. But let me go back to the Ethiopian issue that I started earlier. Democracy has to be there. I mean, there is no freedom of speech. There is no freedom of religion. If you see the Radio Voice of America is jammed by the government now. Radio Voice of Germany is jammed. And the opposition cannot move, cannot communicate with their people. And there are so many Ethiopians in prison as we speak now. You know, this HR 2003 that I mentioned earlier, with the help of our senators here, will have some good things, positive things to the country. Then when we look at Ethiopia, Ethiopia is very resourceful. Whenever we see the television set, we see so many dismal things. But that country has a lot of resource. You know, the river Nile flows from Ethiopia, for God's sakes. That country is rich naturally. But there must be a good government which will lead the people to production, to the economic betterment there. But that's not happening. They exploit the people and just divide them along ethnic and religious lines, as we say.
And that generally happens in almost every country on the Horn of Africa. Would that be a fair assessment in terms of it's not to the self-interest of those individuals I think that you've described as dictators? It's not in their self-interest to create a kind of community of dealing and helping and uplifting the people.
Oh, that's true. For instance, take Somalia, for instance. There is no government to speak of. It is trying to get itself together. Go to Sudan. With the Darfur situation, you all know. And you go to the north, Eritrea, another dictator there. I mean, then the United States and the West should facilitate democracy.
These are the individuals that we seek to deal and negotiate with, hoping to create a democracy for the people, but these individuals are not, as dictators and et cetera, are not really interested in creating a democracy. They'll take the money, but they will not use the money to help the people. They will use the money for their own personal...
Exactly.
Exactly. And that's a terrible thing to say, but is that essentially what's going on on the Horn these days?
Well, if we help the people help themselves, if we introduce democracy there, if we protect human rights abuse in those countries, if we are not supporting dictators all over Africa, this wouldn't happen. I mean, the United States people, the taxpayers, will benefit by bringing about democracy in those countries, not dealing with those crooks. Those crooks are just killing the people. That's what's happening, you know.
And of course, this is the same. This is true in terms of the Kenyan government in a real sense in terms of its refusal to turn over power or to admit any kind of opposition?
Certainly, turnover is a significant problem. And the truth is that you cannot have the same leaders of a democracy justifiably for 40 years. It no longer is a democracy. And so although it is difficult, as I said earlier, to impede on a sovereign nation's government, there certainly can be things done strategically to not aid and support those governments if they are in fact not adhering to key principles of a democratic form of government, and if in fact the United States is actually interested in promoting democracy in Africa. I would also argue that the United States needs to take more of a long-term approach to promoting democracy in Africa, and a long-term approach certainly is not one that that is indicative of simple explanations and quick answers. So a commitment to supporting civil society organizations, to supporting free press, to supporting human rights, you know, in a very strategic and long-term way, are certainly
very good.
first steps.
And of course, you've got about 25 seconds for one final statement.
Well, she just said it. If you think of Ethiopia, for instance, right now, the current government is well over 15 years in power. I mean, in what kind of democracy you will have someone just getting comfortable and suppressing the people? We have to help Ethiopians by having this HR 2003 pass and helping the people, not the dictator.
Very good. And of course, let me thank the two of you for coming by and giving us that excellent information about Ethiopia and about Kenya. And we would like our audience also to understand that this is only the first part of a two-part series that we're doing on the Horn of Africa, because we believe that to be so very, very significant. And of course, let me encourage you to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.